Skaventide is upon us. Yes, the new edition of Warhammer's Age of Sigmar is out, and today we're painting the Clawlord on Gnaw-Beast. So let's dive in. I split the box in half with a buddy of mine who took the Stormcast Eternals, and I took the Skaven, of course, because they're so cool. So I started off by building the Skaven and just using plastic glue to help fill in some of these seams. This is kind of a new push fit system, which I'm not really sold on, but once the miniature's built, it's ready to get primed. I'm starting off with a pure black primer all over. And then I'm priming with white just from above here. This helps pull out some of those details again. And I'm going to fix the base while I'm at it. So this is Pro Acryl's Grey Earth, and I'm using this spatula just to put in some of this material just to help fill out the gap between the model and the base. I wanted to do this stage now because I wasn't sure how messy the model was going to get, and it takes a long time to dry. So I'm starting off with the Gnaw-Beast, and we're going to be using pink for the flesh. So I'm just doing a base coat of pink on the hands and feet. Not worried about being too accurate here, just kind of laying on that initial color. I want this rat to be kind of patchy, so I'm just laying in some early patches here with this pink color. And to shade this, I'm using Gravelord Crimson. And I'm just doing a very simple shade over all these fleshy pink colors. Once that shade is dry, I'm going back in with that original pink and starting to add in my highlights. Now this is going to be quite a high contrast. I don't mind the look, especially for something as small as the skin patches here. And I'm making sure to add these highlights on all of the areas that are showing outwards. I'm going to start using bold titanium white, and I'm introducing this into that pink. And I'm building up these highlights. I don't want to go to a pure white on the Clawbeast here. I just want to add some highlights to the tip of the tail and any of the upturned areas like the neck, the head, and the shoulders here. I'm actually going to start introducing some birch color, and I'm going to be using this for the hands and the feet and the face. I kind of like the idea of the creature getting paler towards the extremities. I could have pushed this further, but I still wanted to retain some of that pink color. The nice thing about using an ivory like this is that it actually retains some of that saturation, whereas a white would kind of desaturate the colors. And here I'm using a neutral gray, and I'm going back into those fur areas and just tidying up some of those edges. This is where I'm starting to correct some of the overspill from the pink earlier, or the shade. And in some of these more flatter areas, I'm starting to add a little bit more fur. You can kind of see my brush strokes are a little bit different by kind of adding these little tick marks for the hair. I'm starting to mix up to a kind of a light grey, and I'm using this to just catch some of the hair on the sculpt. And I'm building up in tone and focusing my highlights just towards the top part of these fur patches. And then finally, I'm using a pure white for my brightest highlight on the fur. You can see that I'm just localizing these highlights to the top areas of the fur, where the sun would naturally hit this creature. And I'm using a Gravelord Grey speed paint, and for some of the chest fur I'm just adding this to help darken the contrast. Okay, we're going to start introducing some metallics. So this is Victorian brass, and I'm using this for the collar. This is a super silky metallic paint, and I love these scale color metallics. And then I'm going to shade this metallic with Seraphim Sepia. And what this does is it adds a little bit more dimension to the metallic paint. It does take the shine off of it, which is okay. But this is a very nice light brown wash that's just going to help sink into those recesses and bring back some of those shadows. While that's drying, I'm using a blood red speed paint, and I'm introducing some of that really gross inflamed effect to like the pustules and the boils and things on this rat. I want him to look like an infected plague rat. To heighten the grossness, I'm now using a moon dust, and I'm adding some really awful looking pus to these spots and boils and things. And then I'm going in with just an off-white and adding just a small highlight to these. This is one of my favorite effects to do. This is Nihilakh Oxide, and this is a super watery, bright blue greenish paint, and it goes on super silky, and then you just use a damp brush and just feather those edges. What this does is it adds like a patina, like an oxide to the copper here, and it adds that level of realism and a pop of color. And here I'm using a speed metal, and I'm just going to start adding some damage, just chipping the edges, adding some scratches to some of this copper. Lastly, this Clawbeast has some warp stones embedded, so I'm prepping these with white, and then I'm using Tesseract Glow, and I'm just adding a simple coat to this. This is a nice neon green paint that shows up pretty brightly on a white undercoat. And I'm also spreading this around the surrounding area just to add the glow effect. And I'm using Athonian Camo Shade. I'm reintroducing some of those shadows on the warp stone itself. And then I mixed in some white with that Tesseract Glow, and I'm just adding a few glints and highlights to the stone. For the nails, I'm prepping them in Birch. And then I'm going to be using Cloudburst Blue, and I'm covering the whole nail with this, and then I damp the brush, and I just apply this while the paint's still wet, pushing back into the edges of the nail there. And it helps kind of recess shade the nail, and then I'll go back in with that birch and reintroduce that highlight. I'm doing the same for the teeth, and a dot of white on the eyes. Screamer Pink is the next color here, and I'm using this for the tongue. And then just a couple of simple highlights by adding some white to that. And that is basically the Gnaw-Beast done. Next I'm moving on to the base, and so I'm using Tesseract Glow here just to add to this warp effect that's underneath. I could have prepped this with some white first and that would have helped add to the glow. But I'm going to be adding a whole bunch of highlights and shadows here. For example, Ardennes green. I'm watering this right the way down, and while the Tesseract glow is still wet as well, I'm starting to swirl in this paint into this kind of mess. What it does is it helps add some shadows, but naturally blend between the two colours. And then we're switching back to that neutral grey again, and I'm starting to paint in some of the craters, the rocks and things, reintroducing that colour on some of the areas that didn't have it from the prime. This is a really good match for the grey earth that we already used, so I don't have to cover this. I went about a fourth of the way up on the Tesseract glow, and so to help blend this transition, I'm using that Ardennes green and just keeping it really watery and just help blending that glow. And then I'm also adding it to the cracks and the edges of the crater to help kind of make it feel like it's warm and glowing. For this wooden structure that's emerging, I'm using dark wood. And this is just a very simple speed paint, just applied onto the prime. Kind of adds its own highlights and shadows, so I don't need to worry about it too much. And for the areas of metal, I'm using Grim Black. So this is just a straight speed paint on here, just to get that initial colour down. I did thin it with some water because I didn't want it to be like a pure black. And then I'm dry brushing in some of that speed metal. It's a very quick and easy way of getting like a tarnished metal effect. I'm adding some Tesseract glow to the underside, and what it does is it helps make the warp feel like a light source. And then I'm going back in with the Oxide effect again, and just adding this to some of the areas. I'm also adding it to the wood as well. And then I'm applying a simple dry brush. This is kind of a light grey over all of the areas of stone. And then a smaller dry brush of just pure white. I'm kind of focusing just on the edges here. Lastly, I'm just using a pure white and I'm edge highlighting some of the warp effect. And with that finishes out the base. So for Mr. Rattus himself, we're going to be using Malignant green, and I'm starting off by applying this to the cape. I really love the red in all the promo material, but I didn't want it to be too Christmassy, red and green, kind of Christmas colors. So I wanted to try something different with the armor. Also, in hindsight, and this is a kind of a tip, don't glue the Clawlord onto the beast. It would have made things so much easier if he was separate. So as I said, I'm doing a different color scheme for the armor. So this is Absolution green. And I kind of like the idea of all this green from the warp and things, and I wanted to mirror these colors. So I'm just carefully applying this speed paint to these armored sections. Because this is such a dark speed paint, it does do some really good coverage and makes some nice dark shadows. And then I wanted to have some kind of tie-in with his outfit and his Gnaw-Beast, so I'm using the same Victorian brass color and I'm adding some accents to his armor, like all of these spiky bits. For the skulls, I'm just doing a quick undercoat in that birch color. And then I'm giving this whole section a wash with the Seraphim Sepia. I'm avoiding getting this on the green armor because I don't want it to kind of muddy the color. So I'm just focusing this wash on all of the metallic areas here. And for his fur, I'm doing an initial coat of dark wood. I did water this down a little bit to help sink into the recesses, especially around his neck. And I'm prepping the tail in pink, just as I did for the Gnaw-Beast. I wanted his skin tones to be a little different to his mount, so this is the birch color again, and I'm just adding this into the extremities like his fingers and his face. I'm going to start doing some cleanup on some of the other areas of the outfit with hardened leather. So this is going to be for the belt here, the holster, and some of the ropes and things around his waist. There's some straps around his feet and the hint of a saddle underneath, so I'm using the same hardened leather for that as well. I'm prepping the chainmail in a grim black, and then I'm adding some pink to his ears. This helps add just a little bit of colour to the face rather than it just being all tan. Next I'm using Army Painter's Dry Rust, and you could use an orange paint for this and just water it right the way down. But much like that Oxide patina thing that we did earlier, now I'm using this for the green and adding these patches of orange to imply rust and age. And I'm also putting this on the chainmail in a couple patches as well. I'm tackling the Victorian brass the same way I did for the collar, so this is adding that Nihilakh oxide to it first. And then doing a damage pass with the speed metal. And I'm also applying this to the green armor as well. The amount of damage you want to apply is down to you. I kind of like a very worn look, so I'm going pretty heavy on the speed metal here. For the tail, I'm shading it with that same crimson shade that I did for the Gnaw-Beast. And now I'm going to start introducing some highlights with Necrotic Flesh. This is a pretty good match for that initial speed paint that we did on the cape. And so I'm using this and I'm applying some highlights. I'm using the speed paint as kind of a roadmap to tell me where to highlight. You can kind of see where it's just slightly lighter in places, and that's where I'm adding this Necrotic Flesh. I've mixed in a touch of white, and here I'm just adding a few more highlights. I don't want to go too bright because I don't want to detract from the armor itself. So this is my brightest highlight that I'm using for the robes. And then I'm adding that pink back on the tail as my highlight. I am going to be jumping all over the place for a minute, but he does have a earring, so I'm using speed metal to highlight this. And then I'm going to be using that same Screamer pink that we used for the tongue here. I'm painting his eyes black, and then a tiny highlight of white. And then I'm cleaning up the area with that birch color again. I'm going to be prepping the horns with that grim black speed paint. And I also realized that I missed the horns on the Gnaw-Beast as well, so I'm doing those. And I went back and forth on the nose, but I decided on pink as well. So that's just a pink undercoat here. I wasn't quite sold on the flesh look, so here I'm using Pallid Bone, and I'm starting to add a shade. What this does is it helps uniform some of the colors together. It blends your highlights a little bit more. So I'm shading all the hands and feet with this Pallid Bone, and and then going back in with that birch and just adding some edge highlights. I'm using Mournfang Brown as a highlight for his fur. So I'm just catching some random edges with the sculpt. I'm using that same Caribou Crimson, and I'm just adding a couple shades to his nose and ears. And then I mix the pink in with the birch colour, and I'm adding this to the edges of his eyes and just around his mouth here. This just helps add just a little bit more realism to the flesh tone. The teeth, I'm doing the same way I did the claws. So this is a Cloudburst blue and then a birch highlight. And now finally for his weapons. I wanted a different copper colour, so this is old copper. And it's pretty subtle in difference, but it's just different enough to not feel like the same copper colour. And then I'm also using the same colour for the pommel on this spear. And then again on the top part of the spear. For the metallic areas of the weapons, I'm using Leadbelcher. This is kind of a thick paint, maybe mine's a little old. So I didn't want to obscure too many details, so this is kind of a light shading of this. I love the way they handled the tip of the spear on the box art, so I'm going to try to recreate that. I kind of like the idea that it's a warpstone chiseled, so I'm using a Grim Black as an undercoat. And then while that's drying, I'm using dark wood to shade the handle of the pistol. And also the shaft of the spear as well. This is the Gravelord Grey from earlier, just as a quick shade on the wraps. And I'm introducing some Agrax Earthshade. This is a darker shade than the Seraphim Sepia, so I'm just applying this to all of the weapon areas here. I could have used that same Seraphim, but I wanted something just a little bit more black in it. And a quick highlight of the Mournfang Brown. And some birch on the horns on the rat. Okay, so focusing on the spear, I'm using Absolution green speed paint here, and I'm just starting to introduce some of that green color. I'm using Jungle Green as my neon green. This, I could have used Tesseract Glow, but I decided to use something with a little bit more opaqueness to it. And so I'm just highlighting some of these areas. I'm getting smaller and smaller towards the center of the spear with each highlight. And I'm building up in tones with the addition of white. And now this is a very, very light green that I'm just using for the very edge here. And then eventually pure white for just some small glint highlights. And just the very edge of the blade gets some highlights as well. Lastly, I'm just using some speed metal again to highlight the barrels on the gun. And then I'm finishing out the model with a black rim. And there we have it, the Clawlord on Gnaw-Beast. I've been so excited for these new Skaven models. I've been waiting for this box to come out. I think Games Workshop did a fantastic job on these sculpts, and I'm super excited to paint more of these Skaven models. As I mentioned earlier, I did split the box in half, so I won't be doing any Stormcast just yet. But if you do want to see more Games Workshop stuff, more Age of Sigmar stuff, let me know down in the comments below. Once again, thank you so much for watching. The channel is growing, which is awesome. If you're new here, I do painting videos every week, and dropping a like down below or commenting really helps me out. I'm super excited to paint more Rat Boys in the future, but until then, I will see you all in the next one.